So, this all started when Brian, my boyfriend, decided he'd finally had enough of me playing it safe. His words, not mine. We'd been tossing around the idea of hosting a swing party for months, maybe even years, but it always stayed just that. An idea. It was one of those things you talk about after a few drinks and then laugh off the next day. You know the kind, sounds great in theory, terrifying in execution. But then last Friday he looked me dead in the eyes while we were eating Chinese takeout and said, "Let's stop talking about it. Let's do it tomorrow." Just like that. He was serious too. No half smile, no joke coming up behind it. He leaned back in his chair like he'd just suggested we watch a movie, completely ignoring the fact that he'd just dropped a bombshell on me. I blinked at him, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth. "Tomorrow. You want to throw a swing party?" "Tomorrow." He shrugged, totally nonchalant. "Why not? We know enough people. You've been saying you're curious. Plus I'm tired of putting it off. It's like ripping off a Band-Aid." "Yeah," I said, rolling my eyes. "Except instead of a Band-Aid, it's a room full of people in our house." But here's the thing, I couldn't argue with him. We had been putting it off. There was always some excuse. We were too busy, the house wasn't ready, the guest list wasn't quite right. It was time to stop overthinking it. So, against my better judgment, I found myself nodding. "Fine. Let's do it. But if this turns into a total disaster, I'm blaming you." And just like that, the plan was set. We texted everyone we knew who might be into this sort of thing. Some were close friends who'd been to similar events before, and others were more acquaintances, people we'd met through the community. I figured maybe 10 or 15 people would show up, tops. Brian, ever the optimist, was convinced we'd get a full house. The next day was a blur. We cleaned the house like we were hosting a visit from royalty, bought more snacks and drinks than anyone could possibly consume, and made a playlist that was just the right mix of sexy but not cheesy. By the time 8 p.m. rolled around, I was already half a glass of wine deep just to calm my nerves. And then the doorbell rang. The first couple to arrive was exactly who I expected. James and Clara, a married pair in their 30s who'd been in the swing scene for a while. They greeted us like it was just another casual get-together, but the glint in their eyes said otherwise. "You ready for this?" Clara asked, smirking as she handed me a bottle of wine. "Ready as I'll ever be," I replied, hoping my voice sounded steadier than I felt. People started trickling in after that, one or two at a time, until the living room was buzzing with laughter and conversation. It actually felt kind of normal, fun even. Everyone was dressed to impress. Nothing too wild, just sleek outfits that hinted at the possibilities without screaming them. I started to relax, thinking, hey, maybe this won't be so bad. But then I noticed them. 2 older men walked in together, looking every bit like someone's grandpa who'd wandered into the wrong party. One of them had to be pushing 60 easy. I froze, clutching my drink as Brian came up beside me. Who invited the retirees?" I hissed under my breath. He frowned, scanning the room. "What are you talking about?" I nodded toward the 2 men, who were already mingling with the crowd like they belonged there. "Did you invite them?" "No," he said, shaking his head. "But does it matter? They're just people. Just people. But not the kind of people I was expecting at my first swing party. Still, it was too late to do anything about it without making a scene, so I pasted on a smile and told myself to just go with the flow. At first, I couldn't stop thinking about those 2 older men. Every time I glanced in their direction, they looked so casual, like they were at a book club instead of this. It was almost funny. But then I thought, okay, let these pensioners have their fun too. Who was I to judge? They were here for the same reason as everyone else. By the time things started heating up, everyone had found their groove. Groups were forming here and there, each corner of the room buzzing with its own little world of energy and connection. The 2 older men. Oh, they had definitely found their spots, and it seemed like they were having the time of their lives. Honestly, good for them. I didn't want to wait around anymore either. I mean, this was my party, right? No use being a wallflower. So, I decided to let loose, took off the extra layers I didn't need, and settled onto the large leather couch in the center of the room. I was barely there for a moment before 3 men approached me. They didn't even hesitate, just took their places around me like it was perfectly choreographed. What happened next? Let's just say it was fantastic. No exaggeration, I'd never experienced anything quite like it. The way they moved, how they knew exactly what to do, it was like they were reading my mind. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let myself get lost in it. The rhythm, the sensations, it was overwhelming in the best way possible. My heart was racing, my breath came in shallow waves, and I could feel myself climbing higher and higher into this incredible state of bliss. And then, just as I was about to reach the absolute peak of it all, I felt something warm spilling across my stomach. It was unexpected, but I didn't care. I was too far gone, too wrapped up in the moment to even open my eyes. It didn't matter what it was. All I knew was that I wanted to stay exactly where I was. I focused on the slow, deliberate movements, the way everything seemed to flow together so effortlessly. The men switched places a few times, each one bringing something a little different to the experience. It was seamless, like they had all practiced this 1,000 times before. Every touch, every motion felt like it was meant to be. I let go of everything, my thoughts, my worries, and just melted into the moment. When it was finally over, I felt completely weightless, like I'd left all my stress and tension behind. But I was also, well, sticky. I sat up and looked down at myself, laughing under my breath. It was like someone had spilled an entire jar of mayonnaise on me. I didn't linger in the thought for long, though. I grabbed a towel and headed straight for the shower. I didn't even bother with a full wash. I just let the warm water rinse me off, scrubbing away the evidence of the evening with my hands. The water felt amazing on my skin, washing away not just the stickiness but the last remnants of any hesitation I'd had about throwing this party. For a moment, as the steam surrounded me, I closed my eyes and smiled. This was exactly what I needed. After rinsing off in the shower, I felt refreshed and ready to enjoy the party again. Everything seemed to flow so naturally tonight, and the energy of the room was still electric. It wasn't long before I found myself back on the couch, the same spot where everything had started earlier. I settled in, letting my head rest against the cushions as I closed my eyes and let the sound of laughter and music drift around me. Then I felt them. The pensioners. At first I didn't know who it was, just a light touch brushing against my arm, my shoulder. But when I opened my eyes and glanced to the side, there they were. Both of them. I froze for a second, unsure how to react. I said, "No, I don't want you to touch me." My voice was firm, but they didn't seem to care. They were persistent, their hands moving tentatively like they were testing my boundaries. I repeated myself louder this time. "Oh, I'm serious. Don't touch me." But they were stubborn. They just stood there, waiting for me to give in, as if they knew I would. And honestly, they weren't wrong. I thought about it. Really thought about it. What's the big deal? They're people too, right? And if we're being honest, they're probably way more experienced than half the people at this party. So I sighed and said, "Okay, fine." And you know what? It wasn't bad. Actually, it was kind of gentle. They were careful, like they didn't want to cross any lines, even though, let's be real, they already had. For the first couple of minutes, I'll admit I was disgusted. It felt weird, and I couldn't stop thinking about their age and how this wasn't what I'd signed up for. But then something shifted. I got used to it. I let myself relax again, leaning back and closing my eyes. I won't sugarcoat it though, it was long. Like really long. At first I didn't mind. I was still enjoying the moment. But after a while I started to feel bored. I was trying to stay in the moment, but my mind kept wandering to the snacks in the kitchen, the playlist we'd made, even the cleanup I'd have to do later. I swear, at least 25 minutes passed, and I could feel myself getting restless. I was just about to sit up and call it a night when I felt something warm inside me. It startled me, pulling me out of my thoughts completely. I opened my eyes and that's when I saw it. One of the pensioners leaning over me, wiping mayonnaise off my body. "What did you do?" I screamed, bolting upright. My voice cut through the music, stopping conversations around the room. People started gathering, their faces a mix of confusion and shock as they tried to figure out what had just happened. I was just, the man stammered, holding a crumpled napkin covered in what was very clearly mayonnaise. Get out! I yelled, pointing toward the door. Both of you out. Right now. Brian must have heard the commotion because he came running over, his face full of concern. What's going on? He asked, looking between me and the two older men. They need to leave, I said, my voice shaking with anger. Right now. To his credit, Brian didn't ask any questions. He just nodded and told the men they had to go. The crowd parted as the two pensioners shuffled toward the door, looking more embarrassed than anything else. I didn't wait to see them leave. I was already halfway to the bathroom, desperate to scrub the entire experience off my skin. Once I was in the shower, I turned the water as hot as I could stand it, letting it wash over me as I scrubbed myself with soap. I couldn't believe what had just happened. The nerve of them. I rinsed and scrubbed and rinsed again, determined to wash away every last trace of mayonnaise. When I finally stepped out of the shower, I felt a little more in control, but the memory of what had just happened still lingered. I grabbed a towel and wrapped it around myself before heading into the bedroom. There I opened my bedside drawer, pulled out the pill I always kept for emergencies, and swallowed it with a sip of water. I didn't think anything had happened that would warrant it, but honestly, I wasn't taking any chances. Back in the living room, things were starting to settle down again. People were laughing, chatting, and moving on like nothing had happened. But I couldn't shake the lingering embarrassment and frustration. This was supposed to be a night of fun and freedom, and instead it had turned into whatever that was. When I came back to the living room after my shower, I didn't feel like doing much of anything. The energy of the party had completely shifted. I sat on the edge of a chair, wrapped in my towel, just watching everyone. It was clear that things were winding down. The wild energy from earlier had faded, and now people were either sprawled out on the couches or chatting in small, tired groups. Some couples were huddled together, speaking softly, while others just lay there, staring at the ceiling like they were trying to process everything. A few of our friends were in the kitchen, sipping drinks and laughing quietly. It was like we had all just finished running a marathon. Everyone had hit their limit, and now it was time to coast. I didn't feel like joining any of the conversations, so I just stayed where I was, letting the noise of the room wash over me. I could feel the heaviness of the night settling in, and honestly, I was relieved it was almost over. It had been fun, crazy even, but I was tired. I was ready for it to end. Eventually people started leaving one by one. There wasn't much fanfare. Most just waved goodbye or gave us quick hugs before heading out. By the time the last guests were gone, it was close to 3 a.m., and the house was eerily quiet. Brian came over and wrapped his arms around me, pulling me into a hug. We stood there for a few minutes, not saying much at first, just enjoying the calm after the chaos. Then, as we started talking, we couldn't help but laugh at some of the ridiculous things that had happened. We gossiped about who had been way too into it, who had disappeared halfway through the night, and who had spent the entire evening glued to the snack table. Brian even pointed out a few things I hadn't noticed, and before I knew it, we were both cracking up. You know, Brian said, wiping a tear from his eye after laughing too hard, for our first swing party, I think we nailed it. I rolled my eyes but smiled. Sure, if you ignore the mayonnaise incident. He grinned. That was definitely something. We spent another half-hour joking and recounting the night before finally calling it a night. I fell into bed exhausted but strangely content. Despite everything, the party had been a success, or at least as much of a success as something like that could be. The next morning the house was a mess. Empty glasses and plates were scattered everywhere, and there were towels and blankets in places I didn't even remember seeing the night before. Brian and I spent most of the day cleaning up, but it wasn't anything remarkable. Just your typical post-party chaos. For the next couple of days, life went back to normal. I went to work, ran errands, and barely thought about the party. But on the third day something felt off. It started when I went to the bathroom that morning. There was this burning sensation, this uncomfortable pain that made me wince. It wasn't unbearable, but it was enough to make me pause. I figured it was just a fluke. Maybe I hadn't been drinking enough water or something. I told myself it would go away by the afternoon. But it didn't. By the next day, the pain was worse. Every time I used the bathroom, it felt like fire. I tried drinking more water, thinking it might help, but it didn't make a difference. The discomfort was constant now, and I was starting to panic. I didn't want to admit it, even to myself, but I knew something was wrong. Brian noticed I wasn't acting like myself and asked me what was going on. At first, I brushed him off, saying I was just tired, but he didn't buy it. Eventually, I broke down and told him everything. How much pain I was in, how I didn't know what was causing it, and how scared I was that it might be serious. He took my hand and squeezed it. "It's going to be okay," he said, his voice calm and steady. "We'll figure this out together." But even with his reassurance, I couldn't stop crying. The thought of something being wrong with me, something I couldn't control, was terrifying. I felt so helpless, and the more I thought about it, the worse it got. Brian held me while I sobbed, stroking my hair and telling me it would be okay, but I couldn't shake the fear. After another sleepless night, I finally decided to go to the hospital. I was terrified, but I couldn't keep ignoring the pain. Brian came with me, holding my hand the entire time, but I still couldn't stop crying. I was a mess, sobbing in the car, crying in the waiting room, even tearing up when the nurse called my name. Brian kept telling me it would be fine, but I didn't believe him. I couldn't stop thinking about all the worst-case scenarios. What if it was something serious? What if it was my fault? What if this was some kind of punishment for throwing the party in the first place? My mind was spiraling, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. When we arrived at the hospital, I was shaking. Brian kept reassuring me, but his calm tone only annoyed me. I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't. My mind was already racing, imagining the absolute worst. The nurse brought me into the exam room, and after some routine questions, the doctor came in. She seemed friendly enough, but that didn't make me feel any better. After a quick examination and a few tests, the doctor sat me down and said, "It looks like you have a urinary tract infection, possibly aggravated by recent activity." For a moment, her words didn't register. I just stared at her blankly, as if I'd never heard of such a thing. "What's that?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Is it serious? Like, is it HIV?" The words came out before I could stop them, and I immediately felt embarrassed. The doctor smiled gently and shook her head. "No, it's not HIV, and it's not life-threatening. It's a common infection, often caused by bacteria entering the urinary tract. You're lucky you caught it early. A 14-day course of antibiotics should clear it up completely. Just make sure you finish the prescription, even if you start feeling better before it's done." I could have kissed her. Relief washed over me so quickly that I almost forgot how scared I'd been. "Oh, I'll be fine?" I asked, needing to hear it one more time just to believe it. "Yes," she said firmly. "You'll be fine. Just follow the treatment plan." I left the hospital clutching the little prescription slip like it was a golden ticket. On the drive home, I couldn't stop crying, not out of fear this time, but from pure relief. I was fine. I wasn't dying. This was just a minor setback, something I could deal with. But as the relief settled in, anger started creeping up on me. By the time we got home, I was fuming, and it all came pouring out. "Those pensioners," I snapped, pacing around the living room. I knew something was off about them. They're the reason this happened. Brian sat on the couch, watching me with a tired expression. "You don't know that for sure," he said, trying to reason with me. "It could have been anyone." "Oh, so now you're defending them?" I shot back, my voice rising. "If it weren't for you pushing me to throw that party, none of this would have happened." I knew I wasn't being fair. Deep down, I didn't really blame Brian. Not entirely, anyway. But I was frustrated and embarrassed and needed someone to lash out at. He stayed quiet, letting me vent, and after a few minutes, my anger fizzled out into exhaustion. I collapsed onto the couch, burying my face in my hands as the tears started again. Brian sat beside me, putting a hand on my back. I'm sorry, he said softly. I know this has been a lot. But we'll get through it. And you'll be okay. I nodded, sniffling. No. I regret it, you know. I thought this was going to be this fun, exciting thing, and now I feel like an idiot. You're not an idiot, he said, pulling me into a hug. You just had an experience. That's all it was. He wasn't wrong. I had learned something, a lot of things actually. Looking back, I knew I should have been more careful, more prepared. Maybe I shouldn't have given in to the pressure of the moment. But I couldn't change the past, and there was no use dwelling on it. All I could do was move forward and learn from the experience. So that's why I'm sharing this story. Not to scare you or make you judge me, but to help you learn from my mistakes. Life is unpredictable, and sometimes things don't go the way you expect. But always take precautions. Think ahead, and be prepared for whatever might come your way. Because trust me, you don't want to find yourself crying in a hospital waiting room like I did.